Whether in pro wrestling or in sports, championships have always been known for a few purposes: to be defended, to be won, and to be lost. But also, champions are only as good as the competition. Unfortunately, there was no real competition for Brock Lesnar, especially since he was never really a champion who would defend the belt on a regular basis like he's supposed to. But luckily for the rest of us, that nightmare is finally over.
My hat is like a shark's fin. Deepest blue is my hat is like a shark's fin. Deepest blue is my hat is like a shark's fin. Yeah, blue is my hat is like a shark's fin. Deepest blue is my hat is like a shark's fin. Deepest blue is my hat is like a shark's fin. Deepest blue is my hat is like a shark's fin.
What is up, people? This is the Shark Attack. I am Sean Williams. We're coming off of a big weekend last weekend with SummerSlam and, of course, NXT TakeOver. So we got a lot to talk about, people. And first and foremost, I gotta go with my feeding frenzy.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
It's funny how sometimes when you walk into something with low expectations, you often end up being surprised. SummerSlam, I felt, was one of those situations. Now, most of what we thought would happen did, to a degree, I guess. The only real title that changed hands were the Universal and, well, actually, check that. Both women's titles changed hands, and the Universal title changed hands, and the Intercontinental title changed hands. With the exception of the SmackDown women's title, we all thought that three of those title changes were going to happen. I said there was no way Brock Lesnar was walking out of SummerSlam weekend as the Universal Champion, that his time had finally come to drop that belt. Seth Rollins had to win the Intercontinental title because, frankly, what were you going to do with Dolph after that? You couldn't have those two fight forever. And as far as the SmackDown women's title, well, I knew Carmella wasn't winning the belt. It was just a toss-up on whether it was going to be Charlotte or whether it was going to be Becky Lynch, but more on that later. Ronda Rousey, however, that had to be, I've said this, that it had to be a marquee pay-per-view for her to win the belt at. That's why she didn't win it at Money in the Bank. But, there's still, while Ronda is decent, she's still green. I definitely don't want to see her do any more suplexes because, frankly, every time she does it, it looks nasty as hell. Plus, the match was relatively short. And I know some people are complaining about how it devalued Alexa Bliss, or why the heck did she have to do a 5-minute job to Ronda Rousey. Look, a loss, regardless of how short it is not going to hurt Alexa Bliss. And WWE had to do something heading into the Monday Night Football season, where typically Monday Night Football still kicks their butts in terms of the ratings. They needed something that would help garnish ratings, and unlike Brock Lesnar, Ronda is committed to WWE, at least at the moment. She's committed and done a lot more to show her commitment than Brock Lesnar has in the last several years. Now, as far as the Universal title, I'll gotta give credit to Brock Lesnar and Roman. That was probably their best match. And by best match, it was short, and they treated it as if to say, let's get this over with. Because WWE, despite the fact that they ignore fans, they're not deaf or blind to certain things. They know that nobody wanted to see Roman versus Brock Lesnar again for the third time in 7 months. And they didn't want to risk people getting up and walking out. Of course, that was probably why they played their trump card and had Braun Strowman come out to keep people there, but still. They knew that nobody wanted to see that match. And frankly, both matches they had before this one were anything but memorable. Why? because Roman and Brock have zero chemistry in the ring. And Brock Lesnar will only work well with the guys he wants to work with. Somebody like Roman Reigns, Brock could care less. But I'm actually happy over the fact that the nightmare's over, Brock is no longer the champion, and that the main title, allegedly, for Raw is now back on the main roster where it belongs. And as far as Ronda not cashing in at SummerSlam, and he didn't cash in the night after because the Shield reunited and ended up laying out Braun Strowman with the Cerberus bomb. Here's the thing. Braun Strowman is the monster among men. He's as big as a Mack truck and just as powerful as one too. You don't want it to be too easy for him. Even a monster as big as Braun Strowman has to have a challenge. Has to have it look like he has to overcome something. Brock had to do the same thing, and Kane, Taker, Big Show, list goes on. You can't have it look too easy for Braun. And yeah, he still has money in the bank, and he said he doesn't want to do the whole attack from behind thing. Now you're in a situation where to get to Roman Reigns, which, let's face it, we've seen him kick the crap out of Roman Reigns numerous times. So while it's too soon to tell if this is a heel turn, this is more like an insurance policy for Roman. But the fact is that he has to now get through Dean Ambrose and Seth Rollins, take them out, in order to get what he wants, which is to cash in and beat Roman and take that title. Braun is going to have his moment. I don't see Roman holding on to that belt until WrestleMania. And as far as the idea of a Shield triple threat match where Ambrose, Rollins, and Roman collide with each other, it's tempting, but I just don't see WWE doing that. I mean, if anything, if that match happened, there's only two people you could see walking out that match as the champ. And one of them is not Dean Ambrose, unfortunately. They've had him in that position before, and I doubt they're going to do that again. And regarding SummerSlam, also, I gotta say this. Nice swerve with having Finn Balor come out as the Demon. It felt like Finn had been re-energized. But now, what do you do with him after that? I mean, you can't have him come out as the Demon all the time, unfortunately. But you saw how the crowd reacted when he did. So, this is something you can't snooze on. And as far as Daniel Bryan didn't get the win over The Miz, the fact is that you had to have Miz cheat and have Maurice help him in order to get the win. You had Bryan lose, but at the same time, you had him look strong in the sense that Miz had to go to his wife for help because he can't beat Daniel Bryan on his own. Daniel Bryan will have his retribution. And I'm hoping that when it does, there's a title involved. And speaking of Bryan and Miz, so the match is now officially set as of SmackDown, where it's Daniel Bryan and Brie Bella versus The Miz and Maurice at Hell in a Cell. Now, the match is not in Hell in a Cell, and frankly, I'm glad for that. Why? Because Bryan has only been back for a couple of months, and the last thing that I want to see is him get brutalized and end up ending his career again in that cage. So as far as I'm concerned, do not put those four in that cage. However, there is a certain other match that I'm a little ticked off about, that it hasn't been announced for Hell in a Cell, but again, more on that later. Right now, that's my feeding frenzy, and now it's time for a mic drop.
Let the battle commence!
As much as Adam Cole and Ricochet was a phenomenal match, and that super kick is still being talked about from that match, I never thought I'd see the day where anything topples Shawn Michaels and Shelton Benjamin, where HBK hit him with the sweet chin music while Shelton was in midair, but it did. This one is going to be talked about for quite some time. And it just adds to the legend that is Ricochet. But having Kairi Sane win the NXT Women's title and the way she won it, it shocked everybody, and it has everybody talking. And I got to give credit to Kairi. She really stepped it up, because I don't think anybody thought she was going to win that match, but she did. Now, the idea was brought up, what if Shayna Baszler moved up to the main roster and became Stephanie's muscle for Ronda Rousey? No. Just no. Ronda is still finding her bearings in the WWE, especially on the main roster, and Shayna is nowhere close to ready. Not by a long shot. I mean, that's too much inexperience in one ring, and you cannot afford to have that happen, especially when you're still trying to milk everything with Ronda for all you can by having her in the women's division. So no, Shayna Baszler is not moving up to the main roster yet, and if they do, it's a bad idea. Alright, and speaking of bad ideas, it's time for one of those moments where I gotta say, let's question authority.
Who's in charge over there? This is aggravating me now. What, I can't count on you people?
You know, I've had a lot of time to think about it, but having Becky Lynch turn heel was a bad idea. I mean, you've spent the last couple of months building her up, and it looked like you were actually going to give her the belt, only to have Charlotte Flair return, enter that match, and end up winning the belt. And the worst part is, you had Becky turn on Charlotte and beat the living crap out of her, and you even had her do a in-ring segment where she dumped on the fans, and guess what? They're still cheering her. They're still cheering for Becky. So guess what, WWE? You chose the wrong person. And here's the other gripe I have about this, is that this chalks up yet another thing where you just hand everything to Charlotte Flair because of her damn name. You want an example? I got a list of them here. You had her end Nikki Bella's record-setting title reign, where Nikki had beaten AJ Lee's record. You had Charlotte win the new women's title at WrestleMania when everybody thought it was going to go to Sasha Banks. You had Charlotte in every pay-per-view match she had against Sasha Banks. You had Sasha lose to Charlotte. You had Charlotte beat her in Hell in a Cell. You even had her in the one that was going to decide the rivalry. You had Charlotte you had her win the Iron Man match, but you basically ended that rivalry in a tie. Rivalries end with somebody winning, and that was not winning it. You just evened it up. And, well, okay, Charlotte versus Asuka, I'll let that one slide because, frankly, there's nobody else I thought was a more worthy opponent than Charlotte Flair. So that one, I'll let slide. But you still had Charlotte end up ending Asuka's undefeated streak, given that had to end sometime, but still, you pegged Charlotte to do that. And now, you're having her walk in to the Evolution All-Women's pay-per-view as champion. You really couldn't afford to have anybody else walk into that pay-per-view other than Charlotte Flair for the SmackDown Women's Division. You want to know why the people like Becky Lynch better? She didn't have a family name that was basically her golden ticket. She worked her ass off from the get-go. Even in early days of NXT when you were having her do an Irish jig for a gimmick, and then she finally started to be a badass. It's like, God, an Irish jig? Why don't you just put her in a leprechaun suit, for God's sake? And this is coming from somebody of Irish descent, and you're doing this crap. And right now, it looks like you spent the last several months building her up, and it was all for nothing. Because you did this. So WWE, you need to fix this thing fast, because right now, they're not buying Charlotte as a face, and they're not buying Becky as the heel. So right now, you guys screwed up, you miscalculated, fix it. And the other thing that, in this Question Authority segment, is AJ Styles versus Samoa Joe, their rematch at Hell in a Cell, better be in that damn cage. While I was saying that I don't want Daniel Bryan, Miz, Brie Bella, and Maurice fighting inside Hell in a Cell, this one, you damn well better put it in a cage. Why? Because you ended their last match in a disqualification. You need to have some kind of special stipulation for this match. And frankly, those two will just tear each other apart in that cage, and you need to have it happen. Because so far you've booked 2 matches for Hell in a Cell that are not taking place in Hell in a Cell. If you're not even going to have one of the major matches take place in that cage, then why even bother having this pay-per-view in the first place? And lastly, Baron Corbin is now the interim general manager after Stephanie McMahon basically gave the heave-ho to Kurt Angle. Really? Now I have to tolerate this thing with Baron Corbin even longer because now he's the general manager? I'm sick of the corrupt authority figure crap. There's only been a few times as of late where I've been okay with authority figures. And one of the biggest ones right now that I like happens to be William Regal. Why? Because he doesn't have to show up all the time. And he's neutral. Not for one side or the other, he's thinking of the show. Hell, Jim Cornette did that when he was the authority figure in TNA, and I actually enjoyed it. But this whole authority figure thing, especially when they're doing the corrupt boss crap, it's gotten stale and it's gotten boring. So, in all seriousness, enough already. This thing isn't working, and frankly, Corbin is not going to work. And that, people, is how you question authority. Alright, gonna take a quick break. We'll be right back right after this.
This is Brian H. Waters, co-host of The Wrestling Realm and the host of Break It Down with Brian H. You're listening to The Shark Attack with Sean Williams.
Thank you for that shout out, Brian. Of course, check out Break It Down with Brian H. Him and I did our prediction show for TakeOver and for SummerSlam, and it was quite a show, and definitely felt like old times. 2 guys of superior wrestling intellect at its finest. Alright, with that being said, people, it's time for some shark fiction. There are certain things in wrestling, storyline or otherwise, that I see and I just can't help but feel repulsed or disgusted by. The infamous Kate Vick angle, which I'm not even going to repeat the details of that one, but trust me on that. That's one. Mae Young giving birth to a hand. Not to mention the whole Mark Henry Mae Young relationship. Eesh. But also the Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, who's the real daddy thing. And of course, the stupid AJ Styles affair thing that they did in TNA, where the girl playing the one that claimed to have the affair couldn't handle being hated on because her acting was god-awful. Not to mention, in terms of performing in pro wrestling, she knew absolutely nothing of what the hell she was doing. This week I saw something like that where I just said, you gotta be kidding me. After a good little segment that they did last week with with the OGs, aka the former LAX, Hernandez and Homicide, along with King, aka Eddie Kingston, taking on Santana and Ortiz and Conan, LAX, in a street fight where LAX got the win and even took King down. So they do a segment where LAX is celebrating with their guys. They're going to get something that they have for everybody. All of a sudden, a car with Hernandez, Homicide, and King race and allegedly run over a kid. Really? That's what you do? You took something that was actually mildly entertaining and made it just stupid as hell, and frankly, you basically did something that was, well, an attempt at displaying gang violence where a kid got run over. You know, you were doing so well with this one, and in typical fashion, you found a way to screw it up. I'm almost surprised Vince Russo or Dixie Carter didn't write that or come up with the idea for that monstrosity. The point is that I'm getting at, people, with this segment. There has to be some kind of filter. At what point is there a limit where we just go, enough? This was a segment I could have done without, as with the other ones that I had mentioned. But, seriously, I'm not saying we all gotta have some kind of moral compass or obey it all the time, but there has to be some kind of threshold where somebody in creative has to go, okay, this is too much. And to whoever came up with this, and especially to whoever looked at this and said, there's just no way, I unfortunately feel my disgust and my shame to that person for not having a spine, for just tossing that one in the trash. You could have done so many other things, but instead you gotta have a kid get run over. This was not entertainment. This was just god-awful. I'd sooner watch the Kennel from Hell match again in the WWE archives. And that, people, is Shark Fiction. Alright, with that being said, people, we go from Shark Fiction to From the Mouth of the Shark.
Smile, you son of a bitch!
Alright, one question that I got from you guys comes from Brian H. Waters. Of course, again, make sure you check out Break It Down with Brian H. and, of course, The Wrestling Realm. And his question, it was a two-question. First one, where do you see the Shield going? I think right now, they're based, as I mentioned, they're an insurance policy that Roman keeps the belt, or at least, the very least, that Braun doesn't cash in on Roman. Because as I've said, we've seen Roman get his butt kicked by Braun Strowman a whole bunch of times, and now this adds some challenge for Braun and doesn't make it look so easy for him. So I see them sticking around at least until Braun gets through Rollins and Ambrose, finally gets his hands on Roman, and Braun takes the title. I do think at some point he's taken that belt, and WWE realizes how over Braun is, and they want to build it up so that when he does win the belt, the crowd will just go ballistic. So that's my answer on that one. Other part of the question. Who's next to challenge Ronda? You know, right now, the only one that I can see being the next challenger for, that I would want to see, is Natalya. I know supposedly it'd be that they're talking Nikki Bella versus Ronda, but just no. I do not want to see Nikki Bella in that match, because frankly, you're going to have her just... You think the match with Alexa Bliss was bad? This one will be even shorter. Nikki Bella is going to get tossed around and just look horrible against Ronda. You want somebody that can actually help her throughout the match, give her a more lengthy match, and you know what? Make it entertaining. Natalya is the best choice. Yeah, eventually we'll have Ronda versus Charlotte Flair, but right now, because, look, you're not going to do a champion versus champion thing because you got to have both those belts defended. Natalya is the best choice. So, I'm saying Natalya should be the one to challenge Ronda. So, one question that this is more of a question I asked you guys in my group. Make sure you check it out on the Shark Attack on Facebook. Anybody can join in. But this question I asked you guys, favorite wrestling entrance music of all time. And a lot of you guys said some pretty decent ones. Brian H. Waters, he had said, depends on the day. But it's NWO Hollywood, Mr. Perfect, The Ultimate Warrior, The Rock, Finn Balor, Shinsuke Nakamura, Curtis Axel, DX, Hulk Hogan, Macho Man. He listed quite a few. And my good friend Ricardo, he said DX, Triple H 98 theme, Undertaker, Eddie Guerrero, Latino Heat. And of course my good friend Carlos, he said his top 5, the Hollywood Heel Rock, Edge, Mark Henry, NWO Wolfpack, and Sting in WCW. And of course, some that I had mentioned was Mr. Perfect, Hulk Hogan's Real American, Tommy Dreamer. Hey, I'm a sucker for Man in the Box, what can I say? The Sandman, because who doesn't like Enter Sandman? And Sting's old music before the whole Crow gimmick that he did in WCW. And another question that I had asked was worst music of all time. And Billy James, good friend of mine, said as much as he loves the Bella Twins, he really can't stand Brie Bella's Brie mode music, which, yeah, I gotta agree. And a good friend, Travis Smith, aka T5, he said, Stephanie McMahon's music is about as annoying as she is. I've skipped it on 2K18. And I said to him, she's never had good music. Ever. But the most irritating entrance music I can think of happens to be the Right to Censor. It's basically just nothing but a siren blaring, and it's annoying as hell. Which is also why I've never liked Scott Steiner's music. And of course, can't go without the polls, which the poll that I asked, or one poll that I asked this week, was of course, what grade do you give SummerSlam? What letter grade do you give it? And 4 people voted, and all said the same thing. It was a B grade. It was a B pay-per-view. It was a solid B. It wasn't perfect, but it was decent. And that's gonna do it for tonight. I want to thank you guys for listening. Make sure you check me out on Facebook, The Shark Attack, and of course Variety Bites. And also make sure you follow me on Twitter at ShaunimusPrime81. And until next time, this has been The Shark Attack. I am Sean Williams, and I am out of here, people.